Spacefair. What the UFO? I'm here with Victor Viggiani. Victor, it's great to meet you.
It's great to meet you too, Caleb. It was a real pleasure. Our chat before we went on was very illuminating, and I sense where you're coming from, and it should be an enjoyable chat. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you. I'm very much looking forward to it too. And I think the pleasure and the honor is all mine because you have a long career in this subject, and specifically you've interviewed many, many people. Mm-hmm. So I'm sort of talking to a master from the point of view of a grasshopper here.
Yeah.
And I will beg your indulgence of my basic ignorance of a lot of your career. I'm going to try to learn as much as I can from you. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with me. I'm earlier in my journey, and you're a wise, accomplished statesman. So thank you very much for getting to join us.
It's really amazing that you state it that way, because over the last 4 or 5 years, Caleb, I've got to learn a lot from the so-called younger generation, as you might want to put it, and I would consider you as being part of that. And right now, I'm going to become, I guess, one of the senior citizens involved in this, although I don't think of myself being that way, because I first got involved in this in 1975. I think I was 27 or so.
Nice.
And it just it lit the bomb from there. And the bombs have just been exploding for the last 45 or 50 years. So, and people like yourself that are new to the whole field and getting, inflicted by it in the same way I got inflicted by it back then. It's really great to see people like yourself becoming involved with a real passion in this. And I thank you very much for this opportunity to not only just interview me and as part of the whole generation, but to continue this whole thing, because, it's going to be up to you guys to really kind of master this thing after it becomes a full-fledged issue with the whole human family.
Yeah. I agree. And I'm sort of in the middle generations. I'm 43 recording this today. So the 20-year-olds are going to take it over the finish line, I hope.
Yeah. But, and I've spoken to a couple of them. Let me tell you, they're really eager about it. They're not coming from the same perspective as I am, or I have, and many of the people that I've been, but they have a real passion in this. And I'll probably mention this during the whole talk, but a lot of them are asking the same damn question. Now, how long has this been going on? And why don't I know about it?
Yeah.
And if you look at that question, it just raises so many other issues as to why they don't know about it. And that really kind of irks a lot of people.
Understandably so. So we'll start with your career, and we'll definitely do some politics of disclosure. I'd love to get your takes on the phenomenon broadly, or different aspects of it. But just to set this up for people, you are the news director of the Zland Communications News Network in Toronto. Mm-hmm. You're an internationally known UAP research analyst and radio broadcaster. And as you said, you've been doing this for darn near a coon's age, a couple of coons maybe at this point.
You betcha.
So what got you into it? You want to start there?
Well, sure. Yeah. It's a question I get asked almost every time. But 1975, I was up at our cottage just north of Toronto, and I'd never really thought about the whole issue at all. And it wasn't something that was on my agenda. I was a school teacher at the time. I was teaching. Eventually I became a principal, but at the time when I first got involved, we were up at the cottage, and I went shopping to the local mall in Barrie. We were outside of Barrie. And while my wife did her shopping, I went into the local bookstore, Kohl's it's called. It's like a Barnes & Noble kind of thing. And I was just wandering around looking for a book. And I came into this section. They didn't have a UFO section then at all. But I came into a section, I guess it was New Age or whatever the hell you want to call it. And there was a book on the shelf called Revelations by a man named Jacques Vallée. So I picked up the book, and I'm paging through this book. And whoa, this is strange. And so I took it home. I took it back to the cottage, and I read it 3 times while I was up there. I had to go over it and over and over again with my second time with the pencil, kind of thing. And ever since then, been totally engrossed in what he started to explain to me in his own mind what this issue is all about, and how it really would impact not just the mundane, circles of life, but the entire human family at some point. And ever since then, I got involved with different groups. And eventually, after a while, as I mentioned to you earlier, I got involved in the radio program called Strange Days Indeed up here in Toronto with a fellow named Errol Bruce Knapp. He's passed away, but we did a radio program for a long time and got into interviewing just about anybody who was anybody and everybody involved in this whole thing all across the world. And so we got to know a lot of people, a lot of different perspectives. And I got to realize that this was more than just lights in the sky. That was basically what really drove me to it. Initially, I was part of a group called MUON here in Canada. You probably have heard MUON in the States. And I wasn't satisfied with their approach. I didn't really, my involvement was about 4 or 5 years. And eventually I was housing the meetings at my school at the time when I was principal. And we'd meet at the school and have hour-long meeting, and they're just a lot of infighting and politics and what's going on here. And people would give their reports about these lights in the sky, and this was the weather, and this was the direction of the wind, and this was the shape of the object, and that's all they talked about. And I got to realize after a while there was much, much more to this whole issue than just funny lights in the sky. And that's when the political interest came about in terms of how this phenomenon was impacting the human family and how it could, and eventually it would impact everybody in the planet. So I moved away from that and more into the activist point of view, and became involved with Steve Bassett and Stephen Greer at the time. And we did a lot of work with them in terms of conferences. We ran 4 or 5 conferences up here in Toronto. I attended the Washington, D.C. Citizen Hearings in 2013, a huge 5-day event. I spent all 5 days there. Mr. Hellyer was there. We can get into that later. So I guess the pedigree that I enjoy was kind of fostered by a lot of really, really intense activists. And I'm talking intense. They weren't fooling around. They were really intense about getting the word out and becoming true activists with respect to how the geopolitics affected the entire planet. So that's basically how I got involved and just refined all of the skills that I had in radio. And I do my own podcasts now, and I contribute to the Zland Communication website. And it is basically the only disclosure news outlet here in Canada. And I'm getting lots of feedback and write press releases and editorials, and people are plugged right into it. So it's a really good thing as far as informing people about what's going on internationally and more specifically in Canada.
What's your podcast called so people can go find that?
Oh, The Files of the Disclosure Agency.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great. Did you say you were a principal at a school when you were holding these MUON meetings? That's so fun.
Well, yeah, it was really kind of strange because it was my second or third school. I was principal at about 8 different schools, and the board I worked with, they moved you around every 5 years. So
okay,
yeah. So this was the second or third school I was at, and this was in the mid '80s, and people say, "Well, where are we going to meet?" I said, "Well, I got a spot. Our library's big enough, so come on over." I'm the principal. I can do pretty much whatever I want.
So nobody gave you flack for that from the school committee or superintendent's office?
That's a really good question. That I got into that a lot later on, and that's another thing we could talk about too. No is the answer to the question. At the time, I was doing the radio program in addition to holding these meetings at my school. I mean, it didn't take up all of my time, but the program was on every Saturday night, and we had these meetings. I'd say once a month at my school. And I'd be on the radio, and the radio would be CFRB in Toronto, and it was listened to by a lot of people. It was it was a news talk radio situation on CFRB, and so you had a more mature listener, and I got to be fairly well known even among my colleagues. Oh, there's Victor. He was on Saturday night talking about UFOs, and My superintendent at the time, plural, they knew all about it. Some of the board members knew about it because three of the board members were, one of them was my trustee, and others were good friends of mine, so they knew I was into it. And there was never an issue at all, one way or another, about the whole thing. I wasn't sort of, an outspoken advocate in that way at the time. I was more just an investigative journalist who was on the radio and delving into this whole issue. And it never really affected my career, I never got any flack from anybody, either at the higher board level, nothing at all, ever. And there's a bit of a story behind that in terms of some of the stuff I did at the second last school I was at, which we can get into in terms of what children were talking to me about through their teachers about their abduction experiences. So
whoa,
that was frightening. Let me tell you,
that's pretty heavy. Yeah,
heavy. Let me tell you, and it involved John Mack too. So
viewers and readers will be familiar with Mr. Mack and his work. But did you speak to some of these children directly, or you said through their teachers you were getting these stories?
Well, yeah, no, I spoke to them. There was three of them altogether that came forward. And it wasn't because of my intervention at all. I didn't have anything to do with approaching them or anything. But the teachers came to me because they knew that I was doing the radio program at the time, and they said, "Victor, you got to take a look at this piece of artwork."
Interesting.
Yeah, so I would look at it. Interesting, and now it came to their artwork basically. What it boiled down to.
Wow.
And with two of them, the other one was a behavioral situation with the child, and I asked the parents. I said, your child has actually the teacher asked the parents, maybe you might want to speak with Victor about it, because they were talking about it at home too, and so I said, do you mind if I speak with your kids about it, because I've got a bit of a background. No, that's fine. We're just puzzled by what he's drawing. That's all. So so their artwork was, one of the pieces of artwork was from a boy, Andrew, and he was sitting in the forest at the base of a tree, sitting with his back up against the tree, and in the distance he had drawn a typical craft on pointed legs, and a creature standing at the doorway of the craft. And I said, "Tell me about it." That's all I said. Tell me about it. He said, "Oh yeah, I have these dreams all the time." I said, "Dreams? Okay, yeah." I said, "What happens in the dreams?" "Well, I don't remember all of them, but sometimes I go into the ship, and sometimes I go different places in the ship, and they would just recount their experiences." And I tried to direct them in a way to find out if they had any previous reading experience. Like, "Do you read about this?" I said, "No, I don't." At the time, there's nothing there for children to read anyways. And even if there was, most of the reading material would be far in advance of what they could read. So, that was another situation. Was a little boy in grade 2 or grade 3, I believe it was. And I'll call him Billy. And it was he was a very severe behavioral problem in grade 2. His teacher was constantly, bringing him to me and saying, "We got to do something about this kid, and find out about his background at home and all of that." And anyways, one day he came in school. He always came in late, and I was standing by the office after prayers had finished, and he walked in. He had his lunch bag all kind of gnarled up like that, and then his collar was his hair was all disheveled. And I said, "Billy, what's wrong?" He said, "Nothing. Nothing." And I said, "What's the matter?" I could tell, and I wasn't going to send him to class in that condition. I needed to talk to him, just to kind of settle him down. So I brought him in the office. He sat down. And he sat in the office. He was very kind of, all huddled in. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "They came back." And okay, they came back. Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
And I trying not to lead this kid. And I didn't really. I just, "What do you mean they came back?" He said, "Well, the little monsters." Okay. And having, lots of reading material on myself, and having talked to a lot of people, abductees about it, So little Mon said, well, what do you mean? They come in, they come into your room? Are they there? Yes, they come in through the window. And I said, well, do they open the window? He said, no, they come through the window.
Mm.
Oh, and they just stand and look at me. And that's all. That's as far as he went. He didn't say anything more. He didn't talk. He didn't talk about being taken anywhere. Although if I had probed him, he might have said something. I'm not sure. But so those are the three very specific incidents about that. And in addition to that, having dealt with other adults who have had the experience too. So it was a very an eye-opening experience to see it not only just in adults but with children at such an tender age, and a total ambivalence or lack of knowledge about what it might have been.
Mm.
And so it was a very difficult time for these kids, and knowing full well that these things are going on. We interviewed John Mack on the Dr. John Mack, head of psychiatry at Harvard University. We had John on several times on Strange Days Indeed. And I mentioned this exact same story to John at the time. And he said, my goodness, Victor, that is astounding. He said, can you send me their artwork? So I said, sure. So I bundled it all up and sent it off to him. And that summer, because he was very interested, he had done a lot of work with adults, but he'd never done any work with children. So that following summer from that incident, my wife and I went on a road trip down to Massachusetts. And we arranged a visit to John's office and visited with him for 3 days just to talk about the pictures and just everything that was going on at the time. And he was very interested in the artwork and the kinds of questioning that I had for him, because he had interviewed children in the Ariel school in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And his interest with children was very intense too. So I learned a lot from him, and believe it or not, he learned a bit from me too regarding my approach as an educator towards children and questioning them in a very specific and non-leading way, because the psychological aspects of leading a child completely, I guess, they fold up the tent of credibility if you don't approach it in the proper way.
Yeah.
So it was a very difficult situation, but a great learning experience for me.
Wow, that's fascinating. You might be the only principal crossover with the experiencer world who has spoken to kids like that.
In Canada, for sure, and I'm not sure about the States, but I know you could be right. You could be right, Caleb. I don't know any other administrator that I know of that had the I guess the background in the UFO and abduction issue that have even touched the issue. Many of them, even if they did, and even in other realms, other political realms or other careers, if you did take on something like this, your career would be over in a minute.
Yeah.
But I didn't care. It didn't really matter. If they wanted to make an issue of it, I was well prepared to. You want to talk to me? I can talk to the press too. We can all talk about this.
Yeah.
I was not shy one bit about it. I wasn't intimidated by it. Not one bit, because of the I guess the passion and the I guess the background that I was given with all of this. There was just no room for anyone to intimidate me. There's just no possible way they could. So, and what could they do?
That's a good attitude.
Well, yeah, you got it. You got to be kind of hard nosed sometimes. I mean, I consider myself a pretty compassionate and patient individual, but I can be a hard ass when I need to. So, and it's necessary,
Well,
especially if you're,
Yeah, especially if what?
No, if you're in a school and you've got police officers at your door because 3 kids have just broke into the local convenience store, and you've got to deal with that, and social workers and parents screaming and yelling at you and telling you that you're running your school in the wrong way, and how do you let kids break into store? Excuse me, could you just back up a little bit? And you really, really, really have to go at these people in a way that makes them understand that you're not fooling around. That you're not fooling around. And as soon as they perceive that level of authenticity in you, then we meet on a common ground. Then we can talk. And it's the same thing with this issue. You get people that doubt the issue, and they'll be extremely critical or even accusatory. And then you go after them a little bit to reach some sort of consensus. Do you want to talk about this, or do you want to be accusatory? Do you want to enlighten yourself about this, or do you want to be do you want to castigate blame Where do you want to go with this? You tell me, and then we can move forward. Okay, and don't give me any bullshit. I just want to know where you're at. Okay, let's be real. And they pretty well soon come to the conclusion that it's not a guy you can fool around with. So.
Well, that sounds like a natural transition into your activism. The initial phase of your career here, it sounds like you're learning a lot. You're talking to a lot of people with different experiences and points of view. You do 1.5 million interviews. You talk to everybody who knows anything about the subject. And as is this a fair description? As your interest deepens here and your career goes on, you start really wanting to apply some pressure to the systems that are limiting our knowledge about this subject. Is that a fair description?
Precisely. That's a very, very accurate description of exactly the transition that I went through. And it all began basically because of the angle of secrecy, of government secrecy. And once and everyone that I spoke to, virtually all the people that I spoke to, after we got through all of the lights in the sky stuff, well, the UFO did this, it looked like that, and all of the kind of the more mechanical nuts and bolts of UFOs. Once you get past that, you can't help but dip your finger into the inkwell that talks about the political or the geopolitical implications of this issue. There's no way you can get away from it. You can't keep on talking about funny lights in the sky all the time. There are groups that do it, and they continue to do it. They post their sightings and their videos and all of that. But I have no patience for that anymore. And it seems that the whole idea of sequestration is so dominant in this that you have to ask the question that if the government is telling us, oh, there's nothing here to see, nothing here to see, just keep on walking. Why all the secrecy? If there's nothing there, why the secrecy? And I've never had that question answered. Well, I have in the last little while, in the last couple of years. The answer to that question is becoming more and more clear as what's going on in the United States is showing us that with all the whistleblowers that are coming forward, the answers to those questions are becoming very clear as to why the secrecy has been in place for almost 75 years. So it was a natural transition for me to dig more deeply into the why of the secrecy and how long is it going to last, and why are we doing it, and why are we accommodating it, and why are we forcing our journalists to become ambivalent and even aggressive towards the whole issue. So many issues come forward to talk about the level of secrecy and why it's present. And once you get through some of those things, start asking people, particularly politicians, as to why they don't come forward, because they don't have the answers, because they don't have the breadth of knowledge that I would have, or the other researchers that are asking those questions. So, and that was part and parcel of the citizen hearings on disclosure that the Steve Bassett operated in May of 2013. He was asking those questions through some people from Congress who were asking questions of journalists and pilots and researchers and nuclear facilities, launch commanders. I mean, he dove deeply into it to ask the questions to why the secrecy, what's going on, and why don't we know about this? So yeah, the transition was actually was a joyful one, to be honest with you, Clay, because it allowed me to be a little bit more aggressive in my pursuit of what was going on, and aggressive but patient. I didn't want to rankle people to a point of turning them off, but your patience will only last so long when you get a wall put in front of you, and once that wall of secrecy is entrenched, it becomes impermeable to a certain degree, and that's what we're doing. We're taking apart this brick wall brick by brick, and we're doing a pretty damn good job of it so far. And it was happening in the States with the Senate and the House of Representatives and what they're doing and the hearings they've had. So those kinds of things are being addressed, and to be part of that kind of activism is really it's energizing. It really is. It's bringing a whole new dimension to the issue. In addition to all of the other stuff, the ideas of, quantum mechanics and entanglement and all of the things, the levels of consciousness that are going on. And just recently talking to Danny Sheehan, he and I were chatting about how the United States government is training children psionically to operate these damn vehicles that are back engineered.
I've heard this thread from a couple places. It's pretty scary stuff.
Frightening. Absolutely frightening. So, and that's in addition to some of the whistleblowers that have come forward who have testified in this way. So when you look at the UFO issue from a nuts and bolts point of view, then you move through the whole spectrum of knowledge, and then you move into the realm that we just talked about. Mm-hmm. You have to shake your head and say, "My goodness!" And it's in some ways, I'm backtracking here. In some way, there might be a reason for the secrecy.
Sure.
If you look at it from a totally objective point of view, it just might be too much at this point in time for humanity to handle emotionally. It could be, but I'm not there yet. I don't believe that, but that's the point of view.
Yeah, I feel like you can definitely sympathize with the people who decided that we should be careful with this information. You don't have to take a huge long walk to see where they were coming from there. It's frustrating that it's gone on for so long. I'm curious about the history of Canada and transparency. Does it take a similar trajectory to the US? My understanding of the history is that there's a moment early on, 40s, 50s, 60s in the US, where this is like a pretty open public subject, and the Air Force is investigating. And it's not like they're telling us everything that they're finding, but it was like a topic of public conversation, scientifically, socially, politically. Right. Yeah. And then things get shut down with that horrible report. I think it's the Condon Committee that just destroys it.
Right.
And it just goes underground. There's like an ice age for 50 years, something like that. And everybody who talks about it is labeled a crank. And even like very serious people like John Mack just like can't get cultural traction. Even going on Oprah somehow wasn't enough to pierce the bubble that that pervaded around this issue and pervaded the country that protected this issue. And then in the late teens, we start getting this renaissance led by Leslie Kean and others who have peeled back layers of the onion that are giving fresh generations tears about it and re-inspiring those of you who have been working for 50 years. Did Canada follow a similar trajectory? And are you feeling good about where you are now? What's the state of play?
Great question. You've encapsulated. You moved from the 50s right to 2017 very quickly. That was great. Yeah. In a way, what happened was, and this documentation, what I'm going to tell you about is part of the documentation that addresses your question here in Canada, because when this information first came out, and I guess reports of, they call them, flying saucers back then, and all the memorandum used that nomenclature in terms of it wasn't UFOs, it was flying saucers. And the documentation that we have up here in Canada, it's called Library and Archives Canada, and a little known feature in the Canadian government that I discovered in 2010, just by total accident. 9,500 UFO files in Library and Archives Canada.
Whoa.
And my goodness, how long has this been going on? And why didn't I know about it? So I started to read these damn things, and it's like reading the telephone book. It's some of them were sightings, air traffic control reports, letters from ministers of defense and ministers of transport, different, intelligence agencies, the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Transport Canada, getting all these reports and having some sort of articulation about what it was going on at the time. And these memos go back to 1952. And the one key issue that came up was a report, an RCMP report, that a flying saucer, like a UFO, was found in northern Saskatchewan. And it was scooped up and brought to a crime lab in Regina, Saskatchewan. And as far as we know, it's still there, the pieces. And I have pictures of them that they published.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, I mean, when you asked me, did Canada go through the same transition or pathway? Yes, they did. But the feature there was one of the memos from an intelligence committee by A.G. Austin. What he said was that in this memo, Joint Intelligence Committee said that we have to follow the path of the United States Air Force on this, and play UFOs down, play flying saucers down at all costs. And so, to answer your question, yes, Canada got shut down by the United States on this issue.
Okay. Well, then This is a good time now to bring in your relationship with Paul Hellyer, because he was an assistant defense minister of Canada. Is that the correct?
He was the defense minister. Yes.
Excuse me.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was the minister of defense and minister of national defense in Canada under the in the government of Lester Pearson, Liberal government at the time.
And how did you come to interact with this?
You ready for the story?
Yeah, if you think this is an appropriate time to.
Oh no, for sure, it's a great time, because of what Canada went through at the time. Paul Hellyer, and there are even letters in Library and Archives Canada written by Paul Hellyer on UFOs. And at the time, when he was asked to comment, so someone would send him a letter, like a regular citizen would send him a letter. Mr. Hellyer, we would like you to comment on flying saucers because they're doing this. And Mr. Hellyer just wrote the prosaic, nothing there to see. We don't really pay too much attention to that. And these are letters written back by Paul and at the time, because he was very clear at the time. UFOs or flying saucers were not even close to being on anybody's agenda, let alone a political issue. He said occasionally it would come up in cabinet, but there was no discussion of them, no long-term action suggested by anybody on this. And that was his position at the time. And so that went on for many, many years. And that was during the period of time that I didn't even know he was doing that. I had no idea. I wasn't following his career one way or another. But during one of the radio programs that I was doing at the time, Strange Days Indeed, we finished a 2-hour session. Both Errol and I were finished. We were sitting at the desk and packing up our stuff. And I forget who we had interviewed. I think it was Stanton Friedman at the time. And anyways, the operator knocked on the glass of the studio, and he said, "Victor, there's a call for you on line 1." And after 2 hours of radio, which you get a little beat, you're sitting there behind the microphone with no breaks. Mm-hmm. So he said, "Yes, there's Jim on line 2." And I said, "Fine, okay." So I picked up the phone, "Hello," and it was Jim from wherever, from Toronto. And he said, "You have to talk to Paul Hellyer." I said, "Why? What's the big deal?" I didn't know that Paul had done anything or in any respect. He said, "Well, he's right in the middle of reading a book called The Day After Roswell by Philip J. Corso." I said, "Ooh." And we had interviewed Corso months before that.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Oh man. That's a good get. That's a dream guest from the past I would love to see.
Yeah. Well, we interviewed him and his son subsequently. In any case, so I'm on the phone with this fellow Jim, just get in touch with him. I said, "Well, okay." I gave him my email address. He sent me Paul's number. And at the time, I should say that myself and a friend were planning a symposium up here in Toronto. The symposium on UFO disclosure and planetary directions at the University of Toronto, Convocation Hall, huge university. And so we had Steve Bassett lined up as a speaker. We had Richard Dolan and Stanton Friedman. And anyways, we were sort of planning this whole thing. And we need a keynote speaker. So I called Mr. Hellyer and "Hello, Mr. Hellyer. My name is Victor Viggiani." He didn't know me. And I said, "I understand you're reading a book, The Day After Roswell." He said, "What do you think of it?" He said, "Fascinating, just fascinating." Very stirring words, Paul's a very matter-of-fact guy. I said, "Well, you know what? We're planning a symposium up here in Toronto. This is 2005. And I was talking to him in May. And it was the symposium was scheduled for latter part of September of that year. I said, "We're looking for a keynote speaker. Would you want to be our keynote speaker?" He said, "Oh no, I could never do that."
Understandable.
Yeah, understandable. So I said, "Okay, fine. Are you finished reading the book?" "No." I said, "Well, when you're finished reading the book, could I give you a shout? Could I give you a call?" "Fine." So I waited about 2 weeks or so, and I called him again, and he had read the book. And he had told me, and I asked him, I said, "Have you changed your mind about being our keynote speaker?" He said, "Yes, I will do it."
Wow.
Yeah.
Was he the defense minister at the time, or he had retired a few?
Oh, he retired after that. This is
Okay.
it was long. He was no longer an MP or anything like that. No.
Okay.
He was that would have been a coup, but
Yeah.
he long finished his career in politics by the time I met him. In any case, I said, "Well, what convinced you?" And he said, "Well, my nephew Kevin told me to contact, because Kevin had a military background, to contact the general in the United States. He never articulated a name to me ever. So he called this general, and he had, I think, 2 conversations with him. But what came out of the conversation was when Paul asked him about the book, Day After Roswell, this general said, and having the background that he did, the general said to Paul, everything in the book is true and more. And he said that was good enough for me to believe that Philip Corso was doing the right thing. And he said, yes, I will be your keynote speaker. And he spoke for 38 minutes before 450 people at the University of Toronto. And it just turned the world upside down for me and for him and for the entire UFO movement in Canada, because he got calls from MSNBC, Radio Europe, and all over. He appeared on every major television network that you could imagine. And just to give you an idea as to how it grabbed people at the time, I put out a press release through one of the major press release agencies in Canada. And I put it out, and it was on, oh my goodness, it was mid-August. I put out the press release. And as soon as I put it out, they give you the analytics for it. You can see how many reads on it. And the day after, 2 days after I put out the press release that had 53,000 reads. It just knocked everybody over. And my phone was ringing. So, what the hell is Hellyer doing? You know, what is he talking? I said, well, you're just going to have to come to the symposium to find out what he's saying. And we've got interviews on CBC, different radio stations here in Toronto, and it really captured the imagination of the public, because it was the first time anybody in North America of cabinet rank would be willing to come forward on this issue. So, and then he continued that for all his career, and we did a lot together. As I told you, I inherited his library after he passed away, and it was quite the clock stopper, as I said in my address when I introduced him. He said, "This is a clock stopper," and indeed was.
So just to give a little context for anybody who's listening who doesn't know the book, The Day After Roswell, we recommend it. It's a good read, and it's an important read if you're going to engage with the UFO subject deeply. The basic gist of the claim is that Corso worked in a program like the program that David Grush has described, which engaged in reverse engineering of materials, which Corso described as originating from Roswell. And he was a part of a team which moved around in the military and intelligence communities and disseminated this technology into modern commercial tech. So things like Kevlar and lasers. And I actually don't know. I was just wondering while thinking about it, whether this book went through DOPSR in the US. Did they review it?
At the time, I don't think so. No, I don't think
maybe
so.
not. And people have pointed to some inconsistencies in the story. Some of it's pretty, big stuff. Like Corso describes seeing some bodies in caskets at one of these facilities, I believe, near Roswell. And if it's true, it's the sensational. It's one of the most important stories that has been ignored by most people in the last 100 years. So it's the next place to go with this. I think it's extremely relevant that Hellyer read it and that he got some kind of confirmation. But I think where everybody gets hung up in the skeptical world about this is that, as far as I know, Paul Hellyer didn't claim at any point to have any insight from his own government military work as to the actual truth claims behind Corso's work. And so all of that, it would seem to hinge on this conversation he had with the general. Because you've thought about it carefully, I wonder if you have some guesses about who that general might be. And because you knew Paul closely, I wonder if you can just color for us anymore your impressions of the seriousness of that interaction and the depth of its veracity.
Yeah. Well, I'm not at liberty to reveal the name of the person that I spoke to, but I spoke to the general's grandson.
Really? Okay. So you
Twice now, and
so you have a solid feeling about who this general was.
absolutely authentic, factual, well-informed, to a point of being present at meetings at the highest level in the United States.
Wow. Well, can I
And
ask?
there's
Go
no,
ahead.
yeah, in this fellow's mind, um, being the grandson of someone like that, and relaying such detail to me about what he said and how he found out the information, and being at the top levels all the time. You're in the White House and you're speaking about this stuff, or you're in congressional offices with people long before anything that's happening now. These are all the precursors to why things are happening now. People like this general were insiders and were open enough, or at least brave enough, to speak their minds within a closed setting. He didn't go public at all, and that was part of the problem back then. People just wouldn't go public because it wasn't the thing to do at the time. And the
I
number
want to ask you about that. Why do you think he took it to his grave? If I'm assuming that he passed away.
Yeah, he has. It's hard to say, people's motives. You're talking generational perspectives here. You're talking generational attitudes about secrecy and the institutionalization of the military state in the United States. Okay, we can get into this if you want. What we call a full spectrum dominance of the United States, brought forward by the program for the New American Century. These were all things part and parcel of how the United States wants to maintain its control over world dominance. Okay, and if you read the Project for New American Century by Bill Kristol, you'll understand why some of the generals kept their mouths shut, and that was the thing to do at the time. Now that's changed. So you can understand why someone like the general did, in fact, take this stuff to his grave, because it wasn't the thing to do. There was no such thing as a UFO whistleblower at the time, way before anything like that could ever possibly happen. But the times are different now. Disclosure has had disclosure is like an ice pick chipping away at this whole wall of secrecy, and it's coming to fruition. So people like the general at the time. You can't blame them in a way. That's just, you take orders and you follow orders. You keep your mouth shut and you keep your mouth shut. And that's just the way things were back then.
Okay. How about the son? How about the grandson?
Nothing to do with it. Nothing. He wants nothing to do with it.
He just doesn't want the public heat, basically. How did you get connected with him?
Through that's something else I don't want to get through a relative of Paul. Okay, through a relative of Paul, he indicated to me that you might want to give this fellow, this grandson, a call, and I did. So,
wow. Okay, and so this grandson felt like he fully understood the level of his grandfather's involvement with this program, and the grandfather, that implies that the grandfather was, as you said, willing to share this information with his private personal sphere.
That was it. Yeah.
So in the story, I'm sorry to obsess on this, but
that's okay. No, go right ahead. I love drilling down into this stuff. Go ahead.
So thank you. In your conversation with the grandson, did he suggest to you that his grandfather explained this in detail to him and told him about the grandfather's involvement?
I tried to get into as much as I could. It mainly focused around, for me, in my discussions with the grandson. It mainly revolved around the book itself and how he vouched for it.
Okay,
and having known what the book contained, having read the book several times, having interviewed Corso and his son. There was so much particulate matter within that book that you could spend days on just talking about, in terms of the bodies and the technology and all of the spin-off transistors and Kevlar and all the other stuff. You could go crazy with all the stuff. But what I focused on with him basically was, how did the general, what did the general know, and how did he know it? And those are the two questions that he answered perfectly. He knew it because he was involved with others who had to keep the secret with him, along with other people in the military. And the reasoning behind the secrecy was that we just can't let this information out, because if our adversaries know that we have certain technologies, and even that the technologies might be possible to replicate, weaponry comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole reasoning behind any of this UFO technology. The weaponization of this technology is the key feature as to how the secrecy is being held back, and not wanting to let it out in terms of what other countries can replicate, especially with respect to the energy and I guess anti-gravitic technologies and all the laser weapons, all the things that are part and parcel of the issue.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why the Grand Senate told me that this is something that they just did not talk about or make public. I mean, they talked about it in their own realm and within their meetings or whatever it happens to be. And he made it very clear. And I asked him the same question that you just asked me. He was not really part of any program. It was not something that he was, involved with in terms of, dissecting things and directing memos and doing all the things that you could have done if you knew this information. He was just well informed about what was going on within the United States government at the time, because of the associations that he had. And so it was a very enlightening conversation, but because of the nature of I guess what his grandfather was into, and to how he had his family to protect, he said, "No, I'm not going there. It's not something. When you guys are," he told me, "You guys are going to figure out sooner or later. You don't need me." So
did the grandson ask you to keep the family out of it, basically?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Secrecy.
He didn't say, I want this conversation to be, under some sort of confidential lock or anything like that. But he made it clear that he did not want his name mentioned or interviewed, or, I mean, he was fine with me talking about it. But that's as far as he went.
And it would be impossible, basically, not to put him on the spot if you were to reveal the identity of his grandfather. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, good Lord. I mean, there are some really extreme claims in that Corso book. The one that I didn't mention was that we made some progress on this reverse engineering, and he felt specifically that the Cold War space race was in some ways just a front for development of technology that could potentially protect us from, alien interests. And it sounds like the way Corso describes it, we made some breakthroughs on that stuff, and we actually got somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting that the way the military frames this, and this is one of the real, I guess, bugaboos that I have with respect to this issue, is that in the context of what this issue is all about, and if you look at it and remove the geopolitical stuff and the military stuff for a second, in terms of all of that, if you remove that from the equation, what does this really mean to the human species? That we're not alone in the cosmos, okay, and B, they're here. Okay, just those two factors alone. And when you eliminate the military aspects and the military intelligence aspects of all of this, you have to wonder to yourself where the human species goes with this.
Yeah.
Okay. Will the United States government continue its full spectrum dominance, or attempts at full spectrum dominance of the planet, irrespective of the fact that these beings from wherever the hell they're from have 2 to 3, maybe possibly 6 billion years advanced knowledge and experience as a culture than we do. And if we would ever attempt to become hostile with them, it would be the worst mistake that humanity could ever make.
Yeah.
Okay. Even if you re-engineer some of the stuff they have, it still does not contemplate the fact that we're not just dealing with one or two races here. We're dealing with innumerable off-world civilizations who have their own agenda, who consider the planet Earth to be nothing more right now than just a mantelpiece to be examined and watched. And and the one message very clearly they're coming through to us is that if you want us to be involved with you in any kind of diplomatic relationship, you're going to have to get rid of nuclear weapons. That's been made clear, very, very clear by these races. Okay. And if you talk to someone like Robert Salas, who's a good friend of mine,
Cool.
that's the message that he talks about. And Robert has also, after years and years of experience in this whole thing as a deputy launch commander at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Robert, shared with me that he was an abductee. He's been taken. Okay?
Really? I didn't know that.
Yes. And along with others that you make your hair stand up on end if you found that some of these people have been taken and have had experiences. Let's put it that way. And it's been very clear to him and other launch commanders that the messages that these off-world civilizations sending to us is that you'd better halt the nuclear weapons things, because if you do, there will be no diplomatic engagement. That's one of the messages that are getting through. So if we continue on this pathway of weaponry and trying to back engineer this stuff so that we come better than them, it's a false hope. There's just no, how can you compete with races that are 6 billion years in advance of us? They would be engaged in time travel, interdimensional travel, and all kinds of things that. The idea behind quantum physics that time is really non-existent. Everything is happening all at once at the same time. All those subsidiary issues that never get talked about. Once they're brought forward, I would beg to understand, if anybody in the human race right now could understand that time, that the past, present, and the future are all going on at the same time. And it's a totally bizarre notion for any feeble human mind to absorb. And these are some of the things that 6 billion year old civilizations take, like we go for a walk with our dog. So we are so Neanderthal in our approach to protecting our planet from these invaders to say that, well, maybe they're going to have us for breakfast. That's such a ridiculous point of view. And if they were involved in that, they would have done it long ago. Now there is a feature of ideology that, while they're here and they're among us and they're influencing our societies, that very well may be true. But right now we are just messing up all ourselves. We're not. They're not helping us screw up the planet. We're doing it. So you have to wonder what their agenda is and why they're doing it, which we fully don't understand it. We have no idea what they're here, why they're here, and what form they're taking, and where they're from. We just don't have. Now, some of the abductees do. Some of the abductees have very, very strong notions, not opinions, notions as to what's going on. But unfortunately, they're not in a position right now for anyone to listen to, and that's part of the problem.
Big part of the problem. Well, let's get into this realm of speculation. I think you're right to open the door to the possibility that if we're dealing with one, we're likely dealing with many different kinds of species. And I think you're definitely right to put on the table that they're very likely so technologically advanced to us as to appear in some sense like mystical beings sometimes with regard to how they can interact with the nature of reality. And complicating that picture, the nature of reality is probably more complex and interesting than we currently understand. As you're getting out with your point about time. So I guess I'll just throw the question to you in a broad, open church door kind of way. What do you think is going on? What are some thoughts you have about the bigger picture here?
Well, what I think is going on, I mean, it's just, and I don't think it's speculation on my part. It's the result of just having gone through the transition from, when we first started our discussion about my involvement with MUON and nuts and bolts and the UFOs and all the pragmatic approaches to all this, and moving to the whole spectrum of analysis of what this issue is all about. You go through it so many times, and you ruminate over, and you listen to so many people, and at some point you've got to formulate your own conclusions about this stuff. And if I didn't have the knowledge base and I had a conclusion that I wanted to make, it wouldn't mean anything. But because of the knowledge base that I do have and the experience I do have, I think I'm allowed to have certain kind of pointed perceptions and use the word accurate. I'm not quite sure, but at least informed observations as to what's going on. And basically, there's only two things really. We're not alone in the cosmos. Okay, that's definite. Okay, that to me is indisputable. There's no way that we can deny that. And the other part of it is that we are being watched. We're being engaged by these off-world civilizations. Now, the question is, who are they? How many are they? Is there a federation out there? Is it one dominant race? Some people think that there is one dominant race, the insectoids. Or the mantis creatures. They appear to be, from my reading of some of the information and to people I've spoken to, the mantis seem to be the beings that most of the other off-world civilizations defer to in one way or another. So that implies some sort of coordination or federation. I don't like that word federation, but at least some sort of dominant attitude or perspective among all these races that, no, just leave these poor souls alone. We can watch and monitor, but that's as far as we're going to go right now. And if they prove themselves worthy enough, that we just might at some point engage with them. But what's going on right now, they've got to solve their own problem. And that's basically how I feel right now. For us to be able to elevate ourselves as a species, we have to sort out our own problems first. We have to show that this whole idea of things like borders, the most destructive ideology on the planet. Mm-hmm. Borders. I mean, why do we need borders? What is the ideological presence behind, or the political necessity for borders in a cosmic sense? Okay, mm-hmm. In a cosmic sense. Things like the idea of secrecy, keeping information from anyone. What does that mean? Mm. And in a telepathic community, it means nothing. The sharing of information is something that we're not very good at. And we tend to hold information because it enhances our position of power. And that's where this stuff really boils down to. It boils down to the power elites that are in control want this information under their own control. They don't want anybody else. That's why the resistance is so strong to getting this stuff out. And if we get to the point where the big secret comes out, and the big secret is, you don't want to know about this stuff, folks. That's what the government is telling us, or the ideology is telling. You don't want to know about it because we know about it. We don't want you to know about this because it's just too much for us to handle, which is a fallacy in my opinion. Natural law tells us that human beings as a species, not as citizens of one country or another, citizens as a species, according to natural law, have a right to know everything that their government is doing. And if we bend to that notion that they control it all, then we'll never get anything. So the notion of this, the possession of knowledge and ideology kept within a certain sphere of influence, is antithetical to natural law. Okay, I'm not talking about legislative law. I'm not talking about rights. There's natural rights. And there are donative rights, okay? Natural rights are the rights that we all have, that every person on the planet has. We have a right to know what's going on. No one can deny us that. Donative law is something that is legislated. The government gives us the rights to know certain things. And if you have donative laws, they give us the right, then that means they also have the right to take it away, okay? And that's exactly what's happening in the United States of America right now, okay? The donative laws are the ones that the government at this point in time is hell-bent for leather to take those rights away. And you can see it. It's happened over the past, I guess, 8 to 10 years. And maybe it's even gone on longer. So when you inject the whole idea of beings coming from another planet, of an organization of civilizations, how on earth can any military organization admit to say, yes, we know what's going on, and we're powerless against it? We don't have any control over our skies.
Yeah.
They're not going to admit that.
Right.
So, I mean, all we have to do is keep pressing forward. And I think the pathway there is going well. And it's better than it was when I first started. It's a hell of a lot better than when I first started. I mean, I would never have imagined that 2017 happened in the way that it did.
Mm.
That year, it's like I consider 2017, everything that happened before that was the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And everything after 2017 is the New Testament. And we're just moving forward. And the transition from what I knew back in 1975 to what I know now, or what I found out about in 2017, is just black and white. It's totally different. The evolution of the knowledge and the pathways of knowledge are just so different than they were even 30 years ago. So things are changing. And the question it could be, I mean, who's changing things? What's changing things? Is it people like myself and all the other disclosure advocates? Are they making a change, or are there other factions out there that are allowing information to get out that are changing things without our help at all?
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many interesting questions as to how it's coming forward and why it has. And when you look at what Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean did in 2017, I mean, that changed the whole narrative completely. Now you've got a lot of negative naysayers about what Lou Elizondo is and was and might be, and his all of the stuff that's surrounding him, the whole sphere of what he's doing. He's just a victim of the power structure that's telling him, Lou, kind of back off a little bit. We know you know the whole story, but you better back off before. And everyone who's been coming forward has been threatened one way or another. So it's no surprise at all as to why secrecy is in place. And how we are how can I put it? It's almost like the story of the lie that could never be told, and if you did tell the lie, no one would believe you. But if you told them it's a lie, but it's been a lie, but now we're telling you the truth. How can you believe that?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You can only lie so many times before, when you tell the truth becomes a lie.
Yeah.
And it's beyond belief. It's a matter of trust.
Yeah.
And that's not something that human beings are very good at. So we've put ourselves in a very, very bad situation in terms of how this information will unfold.
Yeah.
But since 2017, I think things have changed, 180 degrees in terms of how people can find out about the information. And that's what I'm all about. How people will find out, becoming aware of the information. And not only becoming aware of the information, being educated, because as an educator, there are two things you got to keep in mind. When someone becomes educated, you change their attitude about things. You make a reversal in their perceptions of the world, in their worldview. And as soon as you change their attitude about something, their behavior changes. And once you have behavioral change, you got it done. Okay, as a school teacher, that's what I did for all my life. Okay, you can inform people. You can inform people and you can inform, but if you don't change their attitude, you're not going to change their behavior. And that's where we're at. We are in the midst of a behavioral change that's going to allow certain segments of the human family to understand what's really going on. And the better job we do of that, of changing attitudes and behavior, the more disclosure is going to mean something to our politicians and to the media and to people like yourself.
So I'm really interested in a few different avenues about how of potential forward motion here. One is this political project of getting more elected representatives even to be aware of the situation, and then to press on the military and intelligence agencies. Right. Another is activating the media and getting them to ask better questions and engage more. The one that I feel might be most promising is getting scientists more excited about researching this subject. And I think that is something that 2017 really tipped off and lit the fuse for in a great, exciting way. We're not there yet, but a big part of the problem there is just funding. I think when I was prepping for this show, it was not hard to find several hundred scientists quickly who are interested in this subject and ready to research it. What they don't have is money. They have no public funding at all. So I wonder, have you seen any better progress on that in Canada? And do you have a take on whether science can help advance this story more than
Yeah.
government?
Yeah, that's a very
One
good
more
question,
question.
because science is, the media, general public awareness and political awareness. There are definitely three important prongs. But eventually, if the scientific community at some point doesn't completely come on board, and you get, all of the negativists that it's not possible, that it can't happen, it's just not theoretically possible, that the scientific method, that science is unable to explain this stuff, so we just disregard it. That attitude I mean, it's like you go back to Galileo. I mean, what he went through. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, when the sea change that he inaugurated, the attitude that he professed, put him in house arrest for the rest of his life.
That's why
And
he's such a good namesake for Avi Loeb's project.
exactly, yeah. And I think that's a very good point to kind of leverage on, because if scientists don't, I don't know what kind of funding Galileo had, but if
I think they
scientists,
got a couple $1 million. I think it was all private. They're not getting Harvard money and they're not getting public money. That's my short understanding of the situation.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. If the funding is the turnkey to all of this, then I think it'll be a while before we get the preponderance of the scientific community to get on board with this and shed their snakeskin on the whole worldview that they've been perpetuating about the scientific method and all of that, and buying into the whole idea of quantum physics and the whole realities about time and space and everything. Once they shed that, I don't think. What will funding do? Funding will give them an opportunity to, I don't know, experiment with this stuff, to do more analysis. But I don't think funding will be the turnkey with respect to a change in attitude among the community, scientific community. I don't think any experimentation, and it's just my own personal opinion, that with what information is available to most scientists today, like, for example, what happened in 2017, if these scientists were to dig more deeply into it, like Avi Loeb has, and other scientists, I think what's going to happen is them just simply speaking out. Once they become convinced of this information, just speaking out. You don't need funding to speak out. And I think that's why, if the community does band together, which is very difficult for scientists to do, because they're just running off in all directions, like herding kittens. You just you can't get it done in an effective way. If you can get the community to come together to consider the information, like the Soul Foundation, for example, and has done, these organizations are working hard to get scientists on board. And once that wave of openness, put it that way, once that wave of openness gets into their craw, gets into them, into their gut, and that's what this is all about. I mean, the reason I do what I do is because it's in my gut. I don't do it because of some, to make money on it, to write books, I do it because it's in my gut. I know Danny Sheehan does it because it's in his gut. I know Stanton Friedman did it because it's in his gut. And he was a scientist. He was a nuclear physicist. And so when you get someone like that changing their worldview, it's not going to take, with the information available, it's not going to take much for the scientific community to get on board. All we have to do is just drag them out of the 18th century and bring them up to the present and say, look, folks, just sit down and look at the evidence. Don't experiment with it. Just look at what's been said so far, and then make your own decisions about it, and shed the notion that, well, we need proof. How much more proof do you need?
Well, I think they need a flywheel of evidence. That my view of it is that there's so much evidence that it's obvious that we should research this. But what research would look like would be even a small percentage of what we spend on dark energy, dark matter, quantum physics, the Big Bang, all of that stuff. We spend plenty of money on these things, measuring tachyons and whatever. So we just spent, a few $1 million a year. We could get some more evidence, and then that just like video, just like hard data of some kind that you can show to the rest of the scientific community and the world and say, look, this is weird. We can't explain it yet. We need more money to get more evidence.
Right, exactly.
You know, then more people get more invested, and then there's more science, and then eventually there's like a preponderance of interest, which could potentially open the doors of the military and intelligence communities, which have probably been working on this stuff the whole time.
Of course.
And there's go ahead.
No, go. Let's continue.
Okay, well, I have one more thought that I wanted to bounce off you here about this, which is this question of whether it would help or hurt to have everybody aware of the situation is really interesting, because there is, as you said, there could be like very serious danger to having everybody really scared and angry about this. And even we've seen recently, a democracy, bad things can happen, or scary, dangerous things can happen at any rate, however you feel about it politically. Unstable things can happen. And we've seen historically democracies go very bad. So in a democratic situation where the populace was scared and angry, you could imagine a government being pressed to do something that was not healthy for the future of this.
Right. Yeah.
But conversely, in a world where everybody had access to this information, millions more people could be turning their brains to this subject and thinking hard about how to solve it. We could really crack the code on the experiencer riddle. We could probably be making great strides in physics, and we would get together on some large group levels and say, what do we want to do about this? Do we need some kind of like diplomatic agreements about how to reach out, and like what sort of frameworks we want to agree on as people in terms of how to proceed? And it seems to me like that is all just about to happen. Like we are, as this wave is crashing, all that stuff is right behind it. Like the fun popcorn question for you to spring out of this, which is very silly, is just like, what's your timeline? How do you feel about like how close we are to that wave breaking?
I think we should end the interview right now, because you just articulated it so perfectly.
Oh, thank you. Well, we are almost there, I think.
Yeah. But no, you are so right. And like I said earlier in the conversation, the younger generation, or a younger generation, is now putting forward perspectives that you just articulated. Okay. These questions were never asked 20 years ago, 15 or 50 years ago. And now that people like yourself with podcasts and information being more open about this, and these kinds of questions being asked and to a certain point answered, what happens is we're getting a shift in worldviews. And if you look at how worldviews affect everything, from the authoritarian worldview of, you got to prove it to me, you got to show it to me, if I can't smell it or taste it, it doesn't exist, that kind of mindset. And then you move into the other opposite mindset of openness, and about a worldview that it will accept all information and apply certain filters to the information and make decisions based on the information and its relevance in terms of the proof that's there. And you just don't dismiss everything. So all the worldviews in between have to come into play to understand one very, very specific thing about the whole. Like I said before at the very beginning, there's only two things. First of all, we're not alone in the cosmos, and they're here. Okay. So what we have to understand, that who these beings are, wherever they're from, and how old they are and all that, humanity has to come to an agreement. In addition to all the great things you just said, humanity has to come to the agreement that, irrespective of everything, we are on the threshold of the next step of our evolution. And if science, if political figures accept that notion, just that single notion alone, that we are on the verge of the next step in our evolution, then we're going to be a quantum leap ahead in terms of getting the information out. And I don't see any other way of our species not understanding it. If we do not understand that one thing that I just articulated, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. You're still going to get that resistance that, well, I don't know, or I don't want to hear about it. I want to remain ambivalent, all that kind of stuff. If we don't get to the point where we understand that we are in an evolutionary stage of our development that's going to lead to some things that we would never believe possible. We could become a starfaring species. We could automatically transition our genome into defending against any disease. And then, okay, well, people, no one's going to die anymore because we're going to fix all diseases. Well, what about overpopulation? Well, that won't be a problem. We'll become a starfaring nation or a starfaring planet, and we will move on to other places in the cosmos. It'll be easy to do. Okay. And these are all notions that very few people are able to accept and understand or even talk about. I mean, if you were to realize that there could be another planet that we could move to, and gestate life there and work on, and you're getting a whole new evolutionary strand of the human species to expand who we are, not just expand our physicality, but our consciousness throughout the cosmos. Those ideas are so profoundly difficult for most of the population to understand, because we're too busy watching the Super Bowl and cage fighting on TV. You know, that's what the human species is all about, and borders, and all what I call, and don't get me going on this one, and the extinction behaviors that we're engaging in every single day.
Yeah,
that's the nature of the human species. We seem to be bent on engaging in extincting ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, look at it. I mean, tell me something that's going right.
Well,
no, I should rephrase that. Okay. How are things getting better for the human species? I mean, maybe I should have put it that way.
I do have takes on this. I am broadly an optimist, but I will say also that one of the reasons I find spacefaring so exciting and the idea of terraforming other bodies is that I think we owe life a massive apology for all the extermination that we've been wreaking in our own sphere. So when people say, why terraform Venus and Mars? Like, I think partly because we've destroyed so much life here that we owe it to life to start these new ecospheres out in the stars and expand it and grow these lines and move the seeds of a dandelion through the cosmos. And I kind of think we might have support from our lizard brethren in this opportunity if we don't blow ourselves up, to your point about the nukes. I do think we're going to need to do it intentionally. I don't think we're just going to stumble into that. We're going to have a collective conversation about it. So that's what I'm trying to do, one person at a time.
Yeah, well, you're doing a great job of it, because, as I said earlier, when you get a generation like yourself articulating that kind of change in worldview, it is another step forward. And if this kind of movement that you're expressing yourselves with your podcast and others that I've been on, there seems to be this implicit notion that there's a change coming. And it's not going to come necessarily from the old guard. It's going to come from people like yourself and the younger generation, and the people that we're talking about right now in Canada to bring this information to the MPs in Ottawa, up here in Canada. And that's, in the context of what we're talking about, it's such a small step. It really is. It really is. I'm realistic about it. There are many more broader issues than that. But I feel that it's my responsibility to awaken our political figures to the realities that you and I have talked about. Now, we can't, start talking to them about quantum physics and abductions and consciousness. And we've got to bring them to a point of understanding something's going on here, guys, and you'd better pay attention. And here's the information. Would you like me to feed it to you like pablum, or what? How do you want this? What's the plate that you want this thing on?
So to that point, let's land with a call to action. What can people do to help you in your own backyard? I've been calling and emailing my elected representatives. How would you recommend that people reach out to their government officials, and what would you recommend that they say to spur a little more action?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of things going on in terms of the scientific community. That's one thing, but the New Paradigm Institute in the States, with Danny Sheehan and his wife Sarah, they are doing the Citizens for Disclosure in the States, and they've got. I attend their meetings regularly. They've got one coming up on Thursday of this week. I attend their meetings just to kind of see what they're all about, because I'm doing a similar thing up here in Canada. They are getting their legislators involved in this by having people at the grassroots level educate them, provide them with resources, so that it enhances what's going on in the Congress and Senate right now. Because right now in the Senate and Congress, things seem to be stalled for some reason. And Danny and his group are attempting to change that. So I think that kind of grassroots effort, and this, we all know that change starts at the grassroots. unless you get an enlightened leader. It starts at the grassroots. We're trying to do the same thing up here in Canada, in small steps, and having these people understand that something's really going on. And when you inform them about what's going on, and I'll go back to the question that I articulated earlier, and when you do present them with this information, and it's convincing enough for them to really say, how long has this been going on, and why don't I know about it? Then the conversation starts. And I think that's just where we're at right now. It sounds very pedantic, but I think it's so important that in order to move forward, the human species has to do things like this to change attitudes and change behavior. I go back to that all the time. We have to have a behavioral change among our political leaders to tell them, listen, you represent us, and we're talking to you now. So you better get your ass in gear and do what we tell you to do. That sounds very gross. I'm sorry to say it that way. But essentially, isn't that what they're all about?
Yeah, they want to hear from constituents. They want to know. And
at least they say that. They say it.
They do. I know.
Do they want? They might hear their constituency, but do they want to listen and act? That's the question.
I think if enough people say the same thing to any elected office, they take a note and they go, "Oh, okay. Well, we want to keep getting elected." Yeah. So just to bounce this off you, what I basically did with my local elected rep most recently was I sent an email that said basically, hey, what is your position on UAP? Can you tell me what? Because it was pretty clear that he didn't have one. But I would recommend not being adversarial. And
definitely not. No.
So I started with a question, does the congressman have a position on UAP? And then I said, here's what I would like, which is I would like your position to be, I'm in favor of greater transparency, pushing for specific measures that will increase military and intelligence transparency around UAP. And because I'm interested in the science, I am in favor of advocating explicit increases in funding for UAP research. So can you please do that? And thank you so much. And I'll check back later to hear about your policy. I look forward to hearing what your policy is that you come up with, and then just kind of keep hitting them with that. And I also gave them way more information than they probably needed about, here are the reports that I looked at, and here's the recent articles, links to others, elected representatives, people they can contact, things like that. But I wonder what you thought about that approach, and do you have any tips or modifications?
Well, I think you should move to Canada and be part of our movement, the Canadians for Disclosure, because you are doing exactly what we're doing.
Cool.
Yeah, that's what the mandate of the Canadians for Disclosure is. We want people like yourself in constituencies to ask exactly the questions that you just raised, and we're going to be providing all the people across Canada. We've got right now I think 67 representatives. We have 343 seats in the House of Commons.
Okay,
so we've got about almost 60 people registered to go on board and meet their MPs in their constituency committee rooms. Give them resources, provide them the resources that we're going to give them to present it to the MP and ask exactly the same questions you just asked. And that's the grassroots level in action. And I'm expecting some change, because we already have 2 MPs, actually no, 3 MPs who've articulated exactly what you're just saying, that we need more transparency. His name is Michael Cooper from Edmonton, Alberta. Again, riding in Edmonton. He sent a letter to one of our members saying, my goodness, how long has this been going on? Here's this information. I'd like more information. So he's interested. So that's one guy out of 343 seats. Yeah. So, I mean, we're building small. It's no big deal.
Yeah, we've got a small clutch in America, as I'm sure you've seen. It's a handful, but they're out there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and they're willing to listen. And now with our new government, and we have a very vital new prime minister. He's got a lot of issues on his plate, housing and the economy and pipelines and crime and guns and all. There's a lot on his plate. And you present him with this, he's going to go, oh boy, hang on a second here,
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. It really is. And I don't blame him. I wouldn't blame him if he puts it to a side. But what I think we need to do is get this thing in a committee level. In Parliament, if you establish a committee on something, wow, That is a huge step forward. There's committees on everything. There's a committee on guns. There's a committee on this, very similar to what's going on in the States, but they're much more active in terms of legislation than they are in the States. So once you get a committee together on an issue, then you get a bit of movement or a bit of awareness. So that's what we're all about. And we're hoping that we can continue and grow our organization to a point where we get, a lot of representation across Canada.
That would be fantastic. Congratulations so far. Agree about the committee level, wish we had one in the US. I do think one of the promising things that's happened recently in the United States is we've wedged, UFO activists have wedged some tension between Congress and the military. And I think the legislative branch feeling like their power has been undermined has lit a fire under them to go, wait, what the hell is going on? You're supposed to report to us. And, if you're keeping secrets from the populace, hey, whatever. But if you're keeping secrets from your legislators, then that's a problem.
Yeah, that's not the way government works.
It shouldn't be, right? To your point about natural law.
Yeah.
Enlightenment values, damn it. All right, well, let's let people off the hook. But before we go, is there any part of this conversation you want to return to, or anything that was straying around that we didn't grab in this round? We can reconvene at a future date. But if there's something here you'd like to close with, I'd love to hear it.
There's really nothing. I go back to the initial argument of the whole idea of the global awareness, and as a human, I try to think in terms of the global community, of the global culture, and how we as a species are being changed by this issue, or the potential of us being changed by this issue, right down to our DNA, and how it will move us forward into a new evolutionary step with respect to who our species are. And recognizing some of the things you talked about earlier, and I alluded to about our extinction behaviors, and I mean these things called wars. Wars. Let's think about that one for a second, and in a cosmic sense, And the other part of this that I think really should be mentioned, and I'm glad you gave me this opportunity to say this, with respect to extinction behaviors, we're on a path to extinct ourselves. That's the way I see it. I'm an optimist, and I'm hoping we don't do it, but that's the path that seems to be. But my question is, some of these species that are out there that have been in existence for 2, 3, or 4 billion years, did they reach a point in their existence where they eliminated their extinction behaviors to allow them to become civilizations that are 2, 3, 4, 5 billion years old?
Yeah.
And what were the mechanisms that they used as sentient beings to eliminate those extinction behaviors? And why are they doing what they're doing now? And are they doing it now to enlighten us about our extinction behaviors? So I'll end on that. That to me, that's a very important part of what I do.
That is a huge, exciting question. Great place to land. Thank you so much, Victor. Where should people follow your work? You'd like them to tune into your podcast, The Files of the Disclosure Agency?
It's on Spotify and several other of the carriers, and also too on my own website, Zland Communications, ZLAND Communications.blogspot.com. And I've got editorials there, and I've got all the explanations about Canadians for Disclosure, and it's all right there. There's a whole lot of information if they want to try to digest it.
Okay, great. I'll put that link in our description. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with us and your precious time. We've gone late into the night, as you used to do on your radio show. So I've been honored to share a little of that magic with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Caleb. And I'm just so energized and encouraged by not only your format, by your questions, and by your enlightened attitude about this whole situation. And if things are going to be left in the hands of good people, as far as I'm concerned, they can be left in the hands like you. So thank you so much for allowing me to do this with you.
And that's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening or watching. If you like WTUFO and you want it to keep existing, support us at patreon.com/WTUFO or on YouTube or on Buzzsprout for as little as you want per month. Patreon or YouTube or Buzzsprout, this show is brought to you by you. So thank you very much for your support. I hope you keep listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.